Issue 1, sequester showdown.
These cuts are not smart, they are not fair, they will hurt our economy, they will add hundreds of thousands of Americans to the unemployment rolls.
Then why
This is
did
not
he
an
lead us
abstraction.
into it?
People will lose their jobs. The unemployment rate might tick up again.
President Obama used his bully pulpit this week to call on Congress to avoid, get this, sequestration. That's Washington nomenclature for automatic spending cuts due to go into effect on March 1, next Friday. On that date, both military and domestic programs will feel the impact of the monumental $85 billion cuts slated for this year, 2013 alone. Not only does the president condemn the cuts, but his administration is also sounding the alarm. First, the Secretary of State.
But in these days of a looming budget sequester that everyone actually wants to avoid, or most, we can't be strong in the world unless we are strong at home. My credibility as a diplomat working to help other countries create order is strongest when America at last puts its own fiscal house in order, and that has to be now.
Next, the Secretary of Defense.
Members of Congress need to understand that they were elected to protect the public, not to hurt the public. And I hope they'll remember that as they hopefully work towards a resolution of this issue.
The president and his cabinet all want quote-unquote smarter cuts, and with them the closing of key tax loopholes on the wealthy, including corporations. He accused Republicans of obstinacy and avarice on taxes.
Are you willing to have teachers laid off, or kids not have access to Head Start, or
Well, and they have
deeper
the
cuts in student loan
intercostal
programs?
arteries removed from our
Just
schools.
because you want to protect the special tax interest loophole that
If you can't talk about the
the
intercostal
vast majority of Americans don't
arteries,
benefit from.
Let me read
Wrap
a
around
definition
your spine.
of sequestration.
why
You
should I
ready?
listen to
A government revenue shortfall met by withdrawing money from already funded programs. Any problem with that definition?
No, that's right
Is
on
it
the mark.
clear?
Yes.
I'll read it again. A government revenue shortfall met by withdrawing money from already funded programs. Now, question. Will the impact of sequestration truly be horrifying, or is the talk of fiscal Armageddon political hyperbole? What, Zuckerberg?
Well, when it was originally passed, these automatic spending cuts were going to affect so many pieces of legislation that across such a wide spectrum of American political interests that everybody thought they would be forced into it. It would be like a suicide pact. How could they let this happen? Nobody should have underestimated the inability and the dysfunctionality of this Congress and the President to work together. So they do not have an agreement, and now they're going back to the same old rhetoric. Each side is attacking the other, and we're making no progress. It's a disgrace.
Melanie, can you improve on that?
Well, the cuts don't all go into effect in one day. It's sort of a slow squeeze. It comes down in pieces because they have to take $85 billion out of
It's
existing
actually the
government
growth in
accounts
spending
that would
that's-
otherwise have been spent between now and the end of the fiscal year, which is in October. So it's a lot of money in a short amount of time, and it will affect Pentagon workers, and they've made a point they're going to have to be furloughed a day a week for beginning in April. You're going to probably have individual stories of hurt and pain. The family that's saved up for a vacation and shows up at a national park, 2 kids in the back seat, and it's closed. I mean, that's what happened during the government shutdown. And stories like that can go viral. You're going to have kids turned away from Head Start because they can't afford to cover that many people. But it's not all going to be felt in one day. And frankly, people are so cynical
what,
about
videos
government
go
and government
viral?
spending that most people think, you know, either the politicians are going to solve this at the last minute or it's not going to matter anyway. So you haven't, the president's tried to gin up an emotional reaction in the country among his supporters, and I don't think that's really happened.
To add to that, only $44 billion of the $85 billion in cuts will go into effect in 2013, amounting to about 0.6% of
cuts,
GDP,
it's a reduction
according to the
in
Congressional
spending
Budget
growth.
Office.
it's a tiny fraction of all federal spending. That's what we need to get at here. This is really not a big cut in our federal budget. If we can't make that amount of cuts to our budget, we're really doomed. I mean, if you do look at the polls, people want to reduce our budget. They know the spending is out of control. Every time Congress tries to take a stab at it, they fail, and so they've come to this point. I think one of the reasons why people aren't getting all excited about it this time is because both sides know that this 8% cut, across the board cut in federal spending, does not have to result in long lines at the airport or furloughed essential employees. It's going to be the choice of the administration how much pain they want to inflict on the public in order to put pressure on the Republicans to agree to their solution, which is raising taxes.
What do you think? Is sequestration going to be harmful?
It's not going to be the Armageddon, but if it goes on for several months, if one party is saying it's no big deal, the Republicans, and then another party is saying it's a terrible thing, the Democrats, I'd rather be the Democrats. Because the American people will see them, they will react. They don't like the idea of chaos at the federal level. They don't like the idea of long lines in airports, and whether it's ginned up by the agencies and doesn't have to happen or not, it will happen, believe me. And it's going to be very, very bad for anyone who pretends that it's not a big deal.
Okay, enough donkeys. Now the elephants.
John Boehner, Republican Speaker, shot back in the Wall Street Journal. Quote, "The president got his higher tax, $600 billion from higher earners with no spending cuts at the end of 2012. He also got higher taxes via Obamacare. The president's sequester is the wrong way to reduce the deficit, but it is here to stay until Washington Democrats get serious about cutting spending. The government simply cannot keep delaying the inevitable and spending money it doesn't have." Unquote.
Question. President Obama wants to pin sequestration on the Republicans. Speaker Boehner calls sequestration, as you saw, quote unquote, the president's sequester. Is he right?
Yes, he is right in that it was proposed by the president and by his folks when they had the budget impasse as a way of, as I say, putting pressure on both sides at some point to deal with it. But our government is so dysfunctional, we are at this particular stage now. The problem now is, where do we go from here in terms of, this is going to undermine the confidence of the country in the government and its ability to address problems. It's going to undermine the confidence of business who wants to invest. This is just another disgrace in terms of the way the American government works.
Is
It's serious.
it exaggerated?
No, I don't think it is exaggerated. I think it is a major issue. This money will be cut one way or the other out of the budget, but it is going to tell everybody something about our inability to deal with our most obvious
How
problem.
should it be cut?
Well, I think it has to be cut to some extent across the board, but I do think there was, in fairness, okay, an increase in taxes. You're going to have another increase in taxes, but they really need to cut expenditures. They're not dealing with the biggest expenditure, which is health care. That is not going to be cut out of this. It was left out of the program in terms of...
Why? Because that is Obama's sacred cow?
Well, he's got a few sacred cows, but that's one of them.
First of all, 178 Republicans voted for sequester. John Boehner at the time said he was very happy with it. He got 98% of what he wanted. The impasse here is that the Republicans don't want to give anything in new revenue, and the public is with the president that you can't have a deal which only relies on spending cuts. When you have an economy where the recovery is fragile, it's the last thing we should be doing. And in terms of health care, Time Magazine has a terrific cover this week about medical bills, and President doesn't have control over all of those things, and the big hero in the Time Magazine cover story is Medicare, which is actually doing a very good job in controlling health care spending.
Okay, yet more sequester grief.
The U.S. Travel Association and congressional
We're talking
staff
about new
aides
revenue.
concur
We need new
that with the
revenue.
budget sequester, 1 hour will be added to
$1 trillion
security
a year
wait at the nation's biggest and busiest airports.
There's some
And after
revenue.
clearing the security lines, they will probably wait even longer because of cuts in federal aviation staff, meaning a cutback in air traffic controllers. Connecting passengers, beware.
Question. This is for you, Susan. Concentrate. What makes this travel torment unlikely to come to pass?
First of all, It doesn't have to come to pass. The TSA can cut money where it wants. It's a question of whether, as I said before, the president wants to use this to pressure the Republicans by putting as much pain as possible on the public. Therefore, the public gets upset. But that's only going to work for so long before the public's going to figure out that this is a political tactic, and it could really backfire on the administration. I think they are keenly aware of that, and that's part of the reason why they might be a little bit hesitant to start making people miss flights, cancel flights, stand in already long and tortuous TSA lines. It's a risk for him to do this, but I wouldn't put it past the administration at this point because it's worked in the past, and it accomplishes their goal, which did not cut spending. That is the issue here. They do not want to cut spending. Eleanor, you're wrong. They have already given up on taxes in the last fight. Are they going to give up taxes on this one? Nobody cut last time. When are we going to cut? Can anybody answer that question?
Package was not
But that's a gimmick. That was a slight reduction in the rate of growth, just like this is. No one is really making any serious cuts. Every lawmaker on Capitol Hill, both parties will tell you nobody's making serious cuts. That is such a joke.
So, for the record, we shouldn't have sequester at all. We should not be cutting non-defense discretionary spending. Cutting short-term spending does nothing for the big problem, which is long-term spending. We need that money for the services. We need that money to be in the economy. This is completely ridiculous. We should just get rid of it.
What do you want to do with our $16 trillion, $17 trillion national
What you want to do is
I want to control healthcare costs. If we get healthcare costs under control in the long term, we have no fiscal problems. And Republicans would be well advised to join Barack Obama and have a conversation about how to control healthcare costs.
Why is this so stubborn a problem, healthcare costs? Why is it so stubborn? Why can't it be effective?
Because ideology is involved.
No, because people don't take personal responsibility for their own
Susan,
health.
my turn now. What you need to do is close loopholes like carried interest, which Mort supports, and would get money from the upper end. You need to close some of those loopholes, and then you need to cut entitlement programs, which the president has put some of those things on the table. But he's not going to do it if he doesn't get any revenue in return. It's the Republican refusal to find revenue anywhere that is the impasse.
Excuse me, I not only do not support carried interest, I've never supported
you're
carried
opposed
interest.
to it, is what I'm saying. You want to close that loophole.
Yes, I do.
That's what I meant. That's what I was
What
trying
does
to
the
say.
AMA say about this, the American Medical Association, which is the association representing doctors?
The AMA is actually kind of enlightened about a lot of this stuff.
They're in favor of the Obama program?
Well, they certainly supported Obamacare.
But they're just a fraction of all the doctors out there. A lot of doctors who certainly do not support
Obamacare.
Obamacare.
The Obamacare is helpful to them.
Because of it. So then,
Obamacare is
We're talking money here.
Yeah, well, the Obamacare is helpful in controlling healthcare costs. A huge chunk of the deficit reduction that's been achieved is through Obamacare.
Issue 2, minimum wage hike.
But today, a full-time worker making the minimum wage earns $14,500 a year. Even with the tax relief we put in place. A family with 2 kids that earns the minimum wage still lives below the poverty line. Tonight, let's declare that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no one who works full-time should have to live in poverty, and raise the federal minimum wage to $9 an hour.
Minimum wage hike.
He's going to tax.
One proposal put forward by the President at last week's State of the Union address. The current federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, a rate the President wants boosted by 24% to $9 an hour, a $1.75 boost. If passed into law, the $175 hike would be implemented in stages to reach $9 an hour by the end of 2015, 2 years from now. Thereafter, the President wants the minimum wage index to keep up with inflation. The White House says a hike would help lift the prospect of 15 million low-income workers.
It could mean the difference between groceries or the food bank.
The issue of human trafficking.
Rent or
pushing
eviction.
for legislation on this in Florida.
Scraping by or finally getting in.
I say human trafficking
businesses
is
across the
so
country, it would mean
ugly
customers
that
with
people
more money in their
don't want
pockets.
to believe that it really
Despite
exists
this
in our
promise of
country.
a higher
It's a $32
customer
billion
purchasing
business.
level for business in
And
general,
Florida,
many small
we
businesses
ranked
are worried
number
at the
3
prospect
in
of
the
raising
calls to our
what they now
hotline
pay their
on
workers.
human trafficking
I have
cases.
actually
It's all
a couple
over.
of
It's all
choices.
over our country.
The two
But
choices
in
is
South
close
Florida,
down.
especially,
The other choice
and
is
you know, a
increase
lot
prices.
of it, it's a lot of,
Republicans in Congress,
young women
including
from
House
other
Speaker
countries,
John
they've gone to a lot
Boehner,
of
are
rallies
also
who have
tepid.
been bumped from
When you
foster
raise
home to
the price
foster
of
home.
employment,
So we fought
guess what
very
happens?
hard last session, and we got
You
some
get less
great,
of it.
tough
That's not the
legislation
American people
that
still have
matches
to
the
question
federal
whether it's
legislation.
Why would we
And now
want to make
state
it harder
prosecutors have authority
for small
to obtain
businesses
wiretaps on these cases. And we're also
Question
going
is
after
Speaker
massage
Banham right to
parlors.
worry that a hike in the
That's where a
minimum
lot of
wage
this
will
is
depress
happening.
hiring? Paul
And now
Glasgow.
massage parlors
It's
are
worth
forced
worrying about, but I
to
don't
have
think it
their
will.
people
There's
show
a
ID.
substantial literature on
we had
the
some
minimum
great
wage.
strides on
There
that,
have
but
been
it's
natural
a horrible,
experiments where one state has raised it and the other
business,
hasn't. And
we're doing
for the most
everything we
part,
can
not
to
totally,
make
for the most
Florida
part, the
and
literature
the country
says
zero
that a modest
tolerance.
hike in the minimum wage
quickly, I know that a
does
lot
not
of the
lead to loss
discussion
of
that you've had
jobs.
is
What
about
about in
treating
a
the
depressed
victims
labor
differently
market?
because they may be engaged
Well,
in
I don't know
considered criminal activity, but often
there's
they are
been
victims.
any
They are
studies
forced
on
into this.
raising the minimum wage
Absolutely, and that's
in
something
a
we
labor
work
market
very
like
hard
we
on
have
too,
today. Ours is
as
kind of
well as
unique.
creating safe houses.
Look, if
Because
you're a
what we
small
found, a
businessman
lot of
and you
these young
built your
women,
business
you can
around
bring them in and you know,
the minimum
they have
wage,
to be protected.
and
you
your
want
pizza
them
parlor,
to
the pizza parlor next
testify,
door has built its
but a lot
business
of them are
on
living
paying
the
slightly
streets,
higher
and once you
wages,
bring them in,
and your
where are they
workers
going
are
to
used to
go?
being paid more,
So
they have
we're working
less
on creating
turnover,
safe
right? They're
houses
better
for
skilled.
them.
Then
Let
it's
them
the
know
business
that
that
they
has the
truly
low
are
wage, they're gonna go out of business,
And
and the business
some of these
with the high
kids,
wage is gonna take over the business, so it's gonna be a net.
13,
Okay.
17 years old.
Productivity is
So it's
better
a
if you pay
horrible,
people a
horrible
little more,
epidemic in our country.
and
We know
17
you're very
states
busy
already
with
have
all these
higher
things,
minimum
so
wage.
it's always good to see it from
$10.
my home state.
And if the minimum wage had kept up with
Thank you.
inflation, it would be well
Thank
over
you.
$10. And so
Right,
this has
so
been a
now much
Democratic
more,
issue,
including a
been
fair
for a
balanced
long
debate on-
time. Senator Ted Kennedy championed it. They may not get it this Congress, but it's on its way.
This is conundrum time.
So if-
Say you can pay $18 an hour for
There's-
2 employees. You got that? $18 an hour for 2 employees.
99% of the
If you
people
can hire a
trained
new worker
outside
for
the
$7.25, you
for
can then
their
afford to pay a
careers.
more experienced worker
How can
$10.75. You got that? But if the
receive
new hire costs
justice.
you $9, you will keep that employee
Justicia.
and your more experienced one at $9 to control your
Well-
labor costs. What does that tell you more?
You're now in
Well,
the
it
realm
tells you
of
that there are
the
going to be different
Rwanda
strokes for
syndrome.
different folks, okay? There are going to be a lot of companies, frankly, that will,
There
frankly,
were
hire
so
fewer
many
people because they feel they
citizens
can't
in
afford it.
Rwanda
One of the things that is interesting, in this
that
job recovery,
kill
such as it is,
other
68% of the
citizens
jobs
in
are
Rwanda.
part-time, low-wage jobs. We're becoming
they
a low-wage,
cannot
part-time employment
use
center,
capital
and that's very bad
punishment.
for the United States. This will change it
Because it
slightly,
would be
but
a
it may make it
crime
worse.
in
People
and
will
of
just hire
itself.
fewer people in this very difficult time.
The
If you were in a more
Rwandans.
prosperous time, I would have thought this would have been a better time to introduce it.
How should Boehner handle this? Should he go along with it or should he fight it?
I don't think they're going to take it up in the House. I mean, the idea behind minimum wage is to encourage people to look for jobs that pay more, that are outside the minimum wage spectrum. This, again, as Mort was saying, I think encourages us to become more of a low-wage society, more dependent on government. That's just bad for the economy. It's
What
bad
did
for
they
the
do?
strength of the United States economically overall.
Well, they
I
made
think
the
that
murderers.
John Boehner, a former small business owner,
kick butt.
really believes that, and I don't think, and now Congress raised minimum wage, well,
The
5
only
years ago or
work
so.
they
I
can
just don't think
have
that you're going to
is
see that happen this year in Congress.
I think it's a good idea, but I think it's too steep. Issue 3, a
So,
pox on both your houses.
They could eat bugs.
Syria's civil war is becoming increasingly sectarian, and the behavior of both sides is growing more and more radicalized, unquote. So says a new report from a United Nations Commission investigating Syria's 2-year-old conflict, which has left an estimated 70,000 people dead. The report cites quote-unquote credible evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by the government forces of Bashar al-Assad and the opposition rebels who oppose them. The report details, quote, accounts of massacres, summary executions, torture, attacks by armed groups on civilians, sexual violence, abuses against children, unquote. Paolo Del Ponte, one of the authors of the report and a former chief UN war crimes prosecutor, says Syria should be referred to the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Those responsible for such crimes, Del Ponte says there is a list of the high-level perpetrators, should be prosecuted.
I would say the decidor of justice is must be imminent, urgently, because crimes are continuing committed in Syria, and the number of victims are increasing day to day. So justice must be done.
The UN panel also had this recommendation to the international community, quote, curb the
It would be hard for
proliferation
me
and
to
supply of
Thank
weapons,
you would provide
unquote,
justice
into
if you
Syria.
can't talk about the
Question, one round robin.
Arteries
Is the
wrapped
timing
around
of the report helpful or unhelpful to
spine.
diplomats trying to bring an end to the fighting in Syria? Mort?
I think it's helpful. It will inspire some other countries to get involved in that war.
No.
I love the UN, but I
How can
think
you
it's
take it?
largely irrelevant. I think the next step is really up to our new Secretary of State,
when you're
John Kerry, and whether he can
First
draw on his
vertebrae or
long relationship with Assad to
jacked
try
to
to
one
get him to
side.
exile.
Good point.
so that
I agree
the
completely with Eleanor. It's all
intercostal-
it hinges on Assad getting
Reach
out of there, and nothing is
skull.
really going to change until that happens.
I think the Security Council has to vote on this, and if they think it's unhelpful, they'll vote no, and so it will have no effect.
Kerry is saying that he has talked to Assad earlier and he thinks Assad can be persuaded to leave.
Well, maybe this will be a goose to get him to move quicker.
You have any thoughts on that? Any
Well-
inside information?
No, but you know where the weapons to Syria are flowing through Iraq, which is another complicating factor, and you know the
From Iran, mostly.
yeah.
Flowing
So
through Iraq
you
from
know
Iran.
we have something to do with Iraq, and
Right.
it's another area where John Kerry may be able to apply some influence.
He's good.
I hope so.
He is
yes.
good.
He's good at what he does.
Yeah.
And he knows that he
He knows the
and he's
players.
traveled. He's
He
traveled.
knows the
Oh,
players.
man.
He knows the issues.
Oh,
he knows
yeah.
the region.
How many years was he chairman of the committee?
Oh,
25?
John,
well, he
which
wasn't
way
chairman
do you
all
go?
25.
But he was on the committee.
He was on the committee.
Issue 4, the voice of the people.
The American people speaketh. In a new poll, the public was asked how urgent it was for President Obama and Congress
Like
to
Gluckberg
pass
says that
certain key
John Kerry is
legislation
good.
this
He'll
year.
be able to do
Yes, sir.
something about the
70%
situation
say
in
reducing
Syria.
the federal budget deficit.
John, which
Pass
way
it
did
this
he
year.
go, George?
21%
Kerry.
they pass the budget over the next few years. 4% forget about it. Okay. Major legislation on immigration. 51% pass it this year. 37% the next few years. 7% forget about it. Gun legislation. 46% this year. 21% the next few years. 29% forget about it. Climate change, 34%, pass it now. 39% the next few years. 19% forget about it. Kudos to USA Today and Pew
How can you
Research
talk
on
about
the
climate
poll.
change when you can't
Question,
talk
when it
about
comes to
the
the urgency of
arteries
legislation,
wrapped around your
this
first
polling
vertebrae?
does give us a sense of the public priority. But does it give us any idea about a public consensus on the contents of the legislation? Susan Ferricchio.
I don't think it does it in any sense, because if you add up some that don't do it and don't do it this year, you're getting about half the population who are polled for this.
The arteries.
You know, there's no urgency
slice
except
through
for
your
one topic, which is reducing the
socket.
debt and the deficit. That's the only place where you really see Americans saying,
And
now,
now it's
quick,
just
let's do
holding
something
I don't
immediately.
see that at all. Nobody's saying now quick, and
Behind the
especially if you
scheme.
ask them what spending programs they'd like to cut. Democrats don't want to cut anything, and the only areas Republicans want to cut is foreign aid and unemployment insurance. That's not going to get you very far. This poll shows the country is broadly aligned with the president's proposals. When you ask ask people do they support gun legislation, they're thinking of what Obama is proposing, and same on immigration reform, same on climate change. There are majorities and pluralities in favor of the president's agenda. If he doesn't get them on Capitol Hill, he's going to take them to the campaign trail, and that's what the 2014 midterms will be about.
What does it say about whether President Obama is following the priorities of the people?
I think he's following them to the T, or at the very least, he's put out agendas that the vast majority of the American public likes, and that put Republicans in a terrible position of splitting the party. Let me give you an example. It's not in the things you said, but on minimum wage. 3-1 Americans want a higher minimum wage, but people who are favor the Tea Party don't want the minimum wage 2-1 increased. So for Republicans, they're seeing 3-to-1 Americans want the minimum wage increase, but their base 2-to-1
just drive
doesn't,
more work
puts them in a terrible
underground.
position. So I think the president is right where he needs to be.
Here's what my able research staff says. He's not in sync. The top issue is deficit control.
That's right.
70% say it's urgent, but Obama has not yet put forward a budget this year or pushed deficit control. Moreover, his State of the Union address contained $84 billion in new spending proposals. Can you speak to that more?
Yeah, well, I think that's a legitimate concern because that is an issue that could really unravel the economy. Nobody knows exactly when or how. It's one of those stories where Hemingway captured when he
Raising
says
the minimum wage would just
two
drive
characters to
more
talk. One
work
says, how'd you go
underground.
bankrupt? He says to his friend. He says, 2 ways. He says, first slowly, then suddenly. Something
Right.
can
We would
happen.
have
It could
less
be very
accurate readings
serious.
of
Nobody knows when
employment
around. The financial
opportunities
markets
for
could
the
lose
United
confidence
States.
in the American economy
If the
and the American
employer
budget.
was
Then we'd have a
made
major
more
thing.
money.
Something has to be done.
And
Is that your promise or did he really say it?
No, he did say that.
You know,
You look at that
austerity,
74%, that first graphic you showed. Now, do we really think, Eleanor, out of those 74% that they think the only way to do it is to cut taxes? They want to see spending cuts, and that we have not seen the president offer yet.
That look you're getting from,
He has totally
Get me a microscope, thanks. I haven't.
$600 billion in
Okay.
cuts. They're right there in his proposal.
predictions more.
Given the weakness of the economy, the Federal Reserve will not tighten interest rates for at least another 6 months.
Eleanor.
the Oscar-nominated documentary The Invisible War will continue to reform rules about sexual assault in the military.
Susan.
March 1st, the sequester will happen.
Paul.
Lincoln beats out Argo as Best Picture.
I predict that Daniel Day-Lewis will receive the Oscar for Best Actor of the Year and will be revered worldwide as the best actor in the world. Bye-bye.
Just wanted to check and make sure that we were on.
Commentary with Jeff@Jeff.com. Jeff on the side.
The first technology of its kind
Mom and Dad, I have good news.
is now providing answers families need.